with a possible reignition of the war on Iran that could happen the moment President Trump says go. It is day 43 of the ceasefire on life support, as I put it, and the White House says the U.S. military is locked and loaded if talks with Iran fail. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. Here is Vice President J.D. Vance.
We have an opportunity here, I think, to reset the relationship that has existed between Iran and the United States for 47 years. That's what the president has asked us to do, and that's what we're going to keep on working at. But it takes two to tango. We are not going to have a deal that allows the Iranians to have a nuclear weapon. So as the president just told me, we're locked and loaded. We don't want to go down that pathway, but the president is willing and able to go down that pathway if we have to.
President Trump says Iran is feeling the pressure, and he is not ruling out anything about what comes next.
We'd have to open the strait. That would open immediately. So we're going to give this one shot. I'm in no hurry. You never think, oh, the midterms, I'm in a hurry. I'm in no hurry. Ideally, I'd like to see few people killed as opposed to a lot. We can do it either way, but I'd like to see few people killed. What we've done is amazing, and we have them decimated. Iran is decimated.
Former CENTCOM Naval Forces Commander Vice Admiral John Miller is with me. I'll go first, though, to Chief Foreign Correspondent Trey Yingst. Trey.
Harris, good morning. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly held a lengthy phone call overnight as the region waits to see if the war will resume. Earlier, President Trump discussed his relationship and coordination with the Israeli leader.
What have you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu about Iran and how long to hold off on strike?
He's fine. He'll do whatever I want him to do. He's a very good man. He'll do whatever I want him to do, and he's a great guy. To me, he's a great guy.
You're on the same page with him on Iran?
Yeah.
These comments come amid a massive U.S. military buildup across the Middle East. New video shows U.S. refuelers parked at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport, waiting in case President Trump orders new strikes against the Iranian regime. Overnight, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps released a new threat, warning the United States and Israel against launching another bombing campaign. The IRGC put out a statement saying if the aggression against Iran is repeated, the regional war that was promised will this time go beyond the borders of the region, and you will be dealt crushing blows in places you do not expect, and you will fall into the abyss of defeat and destruction. The threat comes as President Trump says he was just an hour away from deciding to strike Iran earlier this week and is giving the regime a few additional days to reach a deal. As for the possibility of an agreement, reports do indicate there are still serious gaps in the positions of the United States and Iran. Vice President J.D. Vance was asked about this process yesterday.
So what we've done is tried to be as clear as possible. What are our red lines? What are the things that we're willing to be accommodating on? And what are the things that we absolutely must have? And as the president has said ad nauseum, and I think I've said it a lot too, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Inside Iran, the regime has released new videos showing civilians learning how to use small arms. A variety of similar videos have been published in recent days as Iran vows to fight the United States.
Definitely we will stand against them and won't give up even an inch of our soil. We are even ready to sacrifice our blood, our lives, instead of giving them an inch of our soil. No matter they come from the sea or land, we will stand by our flag.
Overnight, the Israelis held a 5-hour cabinet meeting preparing for the possibility that the war resumes. Harris?
Trey, thank you very much. Let's go now to Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis and what he had to say in this new opinion piece for FoxNews.com. He argues that the United States faces a fundamental fork in the road. And here's part of it. The real fork is not escalation versus diplomacy. It is this: accept a nuclear-capable Iran as the permanent outcome of this war, or accept the cost of physically removing the threat. Washington should make that decision deliberately, not by default, when the ceasefire finally collapses. All of that a quote. In focus with me now, Vice Admiral John Miller, former Central Command Naval Forces Commander. Great to have you, sir. So what is your reaction to the idea that this is really bifurcated, one thing or the other?
Well, I think, Harrison, thanks for having me. It's really always been that at the end of the conflict, Iran wasn't going to be able to develop or have a nuclear weapon for their employment somewhere in the region or elsewhere in the world. And so it's sort of crystallized, I think, in everyone's mind now. But a satisfactory outcome has to include the fact that the Iranians will not have access to a nuclear weapon. They won't be able to develop a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, what I caught there, and I mean, I've heard this, and like you say, we know this. You didn't say end of ceasefire. You said the end of the conflict, which can be something very different depending on what happens next. An op-ed argues Iran is gambling that President Trump will cave. It hasn't gone well for them so far. And, quote, if the Islamic Republic continues testing American resolve, the next confrontation may no longer resemble calibrated deterrence. It may become the moment that determines whether Trump's Iran doctrine was merely pressure or the beginning of historic change. Your take?
Well, I think the president's been very clear that one way or another, at the conclusion of the conflict, Iran will not be able to have a nuclear weapon, and they won't be able to threaten their neighbors and do things like close the Strait of Hormuz. He would obviously prefer to do that through some sort of a negotiation, but he's also clearly indicated that if he has to resort to combat power, he'll do that. And the combat power is available. It's there. It's ready. And I think it's very clear to the Iranian regime that they're not going to prevail in this conflict one way or another. And I think they're beginning to get an understanding that the president has a lot of patience, but that patience is not without limit.
Right. And this idea that their country can kind of outlast ours is a bit ridiculous anyway, because they're the people who got hit in the first place and didn't see it coming. Vice Admiral, I am curious about a little bit of strategy now. Exactly what happens if we're so-called locked and loaded, like the White House says?
Well, there's a number of ways this could go, and the president has a whole range of options available to him. What I would expect, though, is that we would see immediate pressure on their leadership once again, so the potential for additional decapitation strikes. I think a lot of pressure on their command and control systems, the systems that allow them to communicate from Tehran or wherever they are down into the Strait of Hormuz region to the Revolutionary Guard folks, and then a lot of pressure in the Strait of Hormuz itself against potential cruise missile sites, places where they can launch drones, and, of course, against the small boats that they like to send out into the Gulf to harass the shipping. And I think you'll see a focus on all of that as a way to move the negotiations forward, or the conditions for the negotiations forward. And then, absent that, I think you'll see a greater sense of warfare across the country again.
Casham, Karg Islands, those areas that we know are tremendously important to the oil infrastructure, and any way that they can get a source of cash into that country, Iran. Do we go after those islands with our military?
I don't know that there's a need to go after Karg Island, because things are pretty quiet there right now and have been for several weeks, because the Iranians can't find ships to get into Karg Island to fill them up and export their oil. So that part of the blockade has been extraordinarily effective. There are some other islands closer to the strait that we might be interested in occupying for a period of time, because it helps with control of the strait. At the end of the day, the United States doesn't want control of the strait. We want the strait to be open for everyone to use.
All right, Vice Admiral, the president is getting ready to speak. Just a quick thought about what you'd like to hear him say on Iran as he talks with the Coast Guard cadets today.
Well, first of all, congratulations to them and welcome. We're glad to have them on board the team. Coast Guards are a great partner of all of the armed forces. I think the president will be pretty clear about the role that forces like the Coast Guard will play in the conclusion of the Iran conflict, whether it's a deterrent as a hedge against further aggression on the part of the United States in order to end the conflict, or their actual participation in combat operations, and an understanding that when we get the Iran conflict concluded, we still live in a difficult and dangerous world, and organizations like the Coast Guard, which ensure freedom of navigation all over the place, as well as safety of our mariners, is incredibly important, and they're entering a brave new world, and we're certainly glad to have them on board.
Vice Admiral John Fozzie Miller, I can tell how many men and women you have led. You were so prepared with that. I appreciate it. As a leader, sir, it's humbling. Thank you. Good to see you. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.